Welcome back everyone. Today we are going to start chapter 6, Towns, Traders and Craftspersons. So what would a traveler visiting a medieval town expect to find? This would depend on what kind of town it was. A temple town, an administrative town, a commercial town or a port town, to name just some possibilities. In fact, many towns combined several functions. They were administrative centers, temple towns as well as centers of commercial activities. So here is a map which shows some of the important centers of trade and artisanal production in central and south India. So you can see here Vrindavan, Pushkar, Ajmer in the north, and Murshidabad and Calcutta near west eastern India, and in west it was Ahmedabad, Somnath, Bombay, Surat, Berar, and going to south Madurai, Tanjavur, Urayur, Mahabalipuram, Madras, Tirupati, Kanchipuram, Tiruvannamalai and Swami Malai. So these were, and Hampi. So these are the examples. So you can see it here. Administrative centers. You read about the Chola dynasty in chapter 2. Let's travel in our imagination to Tanjavur, the capital of Cholas, as it was 1,000 years ago. So the Cholas had this capital town in Tanjavur, and it was thousands of years ago. The perennial river Kaveri flows near this beautiful town. One hears the bells of Raja Rajeshwara temple built by King Rajaraja Chola. So the town people are all praised for its architect Kunjara Mallan Rajaraja Perunatha Chan. So who has proudly carved his name on the temple wall. Inside is a massive Shivlinga. Beside the temple, there are places where mandapas and pavilions. Kings hold courts in these mandapas, issuing order to their subordinates. These are also barracks for the army. So beside the temple, there was a palace with mandapas or pavilion in them, and king hold their courts there to issue orders to their subordinates. The town is bustling with markets selling grain, spices, clothes, and jewelry. Water supply for the town comes from wells and tanks. So the water supply was coming from the wells and tanks nearby. The Salia weavers of Tanjavur and the nearby towns of Urayur are busy producing clothes for flags to be used in the temple festival. Fine cottons for the king and nobility, and coarse cotton for the masses. So fine cottons for the king and coarse cotton were used for the masses. Some distance away at Swami Malai, the sthapatis or sculptures are making exquisite bronze idols and tall ornamental bell metals. So bell metal lamps were produced by the sculptures. And temple town and pilgrimage centers. Tanjavur is also an example of a temple town. Temple towns represent a very important pattern of urbanization. The process by which cities develop, temples were often central to the economy and society. So during those times, temples were often the center for the economy and society. Rulers built temple to demonstrate the devotion to various deities. They also endowed temples with grant of land and money to carry out elaborate rituals, feed pilgrims and priests, and celebrate festivals. Pilgrims who flocked to the temples also made donations. So temple was the center. Bronze bell metal and the lost wax technique. So you can see here a bronze statue of Krishna subduing the serpent demon Kaliya. So bronze is an alloy containing copper and tin. Bell metal contain a great proportion of tin than other kind of bronze. This produce a bell-like sound. Chola bronze statues seen in chapter 2 were made using the lost wax technique. First, an image was made out of wax. This was covered with clay and allowed to dry. Next, it was heated and a tiny hole was made in the clay cover. The molten wax was drained out through the hole. Then molten metal was poured into the clay mold through the hole. Once the metal cooled and solidified, the clay cover was carefully removed and the image was cleaned and polished. So this was the lost wax technique. So that was very intelligent work. Temple authorities used their wealth to finance trade and banking. Gradually, a large number of priests, workers, artisans, traders, etc. settled near the temple to cater to its need and those of the pilgrims. Thus grew temple towns. Temple towns emerged around temples such as those in the Bhilasa or Vidisha in Madhya Pradesh and Somnath in Gujarat. Other important temple towns included Kanchipuram and Madurai in Tamil Nadu and Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh. Pilgrimage centers are slowly developed into townships. Vrindavan, Uttar Pradesh and Tiruvannamalai, Tamil Nadu are examples of such towns. Ajmer, Rajasthan was the capital of Chauhan kings in the 12th century and the later became the Suba headquarters used under the Mughals. It provides an excellent example of religious coexistence. Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, the celebrated Sufi saint, see also in chapter 8, who settled there in the 12th century, attracted devotees from all creeds. Near Ajmer is a lake Pushkar which has attracted pilgrimage from ancient times. So near Ajmer there is a lake called Pushkar which has attracted pilgrims from ancient times. A network of small towns. From the 8th century onwards, the subcontinent was dotted with several small towns. Those probably emerged from the large villages. They usually had a mandapika or mandi or at later times to which nearby villages brought their produces to sell. So they brought their produces to sell from these mandis. They also had market streets called hat in later time, before it was called hata, lined with shops. Beside there was streets for different kinds of artisans such as potters, oil pressers, sugar makers, toddy makers, smiths, stonemasons, etc. While some traders live in the town, others traveled from town to town. So some traders were living in the town and others were traveling from town to sell their goods. Many came from far and near to sell to these towns to buy local articles and sell products of distant places like horses, salt, camphor, saffron, betel nuts and spices like pepper. So you can see a city market in figure number 2. So this was like a city market, Hata, and now it is called hut. Usually a Samanta or in later times a Zamindar built a fortified palace in or near these towns. They levied taxes on traders, artisans and articles of trade and sometimes donated the right to collect these taxes to local temples, which had been built by themselves or by rich merchants. These rights were recorded in inscriptions that have survived to this date. So we have these inscriptions till date. So you can see a wooden carver carving a wood in figure number 3. Taxes on market. The following is a summary from 10th century inscriptions from Rajasthan which lists the due that were to be collected by temple authorities. There were taxes of all kinds: sugar and jaggery, dyes, thread and cotton, on coconut, salt, areca nuts, butter, sesame oil, on clothes. Beside these, there were taxes on traders, on those who sold metal goods, on distillers, on oil and on cattle fodder, and on loads of grain. Some of these taxes were collected in kind while others were collected in cash. So traders began small. There were many kinds of traders. These included the Banjaras, see also in chapter 7. Several traders, especially horse traders, formed associations with the headmen who negotiated on their behalf with the warriors who brought horses. Since traders had to pass through many kingdoms and forests, they usually traveled in caravans and formed guilds to protect their interests. There were several such guilds in South India from the 8th century onwards. The most famous being the Mani Gramam or Nana Desha. These guilds traded intensively both within the peninsula and with Southeast Asia and China. There were also communities like the Chettias and the Marwari Oswal who went on to become the principal trading groups of the country. Gujarati traders, including the communities of Hindu Baniyas and Muslim Bohras, traded extensively with the ports of the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, East Africa, Southeast Asia and China. They sold textiles and spices in these ports and in exchange brought gold and ivory from Africa and spices, tin, Chinese blue pottery and silver from Southeast Asia and China. The towns on the west coast were home to Arab, Persian, Chinese, Jewish and Syrian Christians traders. Indian spices and clothes sold in the Red Sea ports were purchased by the Italian traders and eventually reached European markets, fetching very high profits. Spices grown in tropical climates, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, dried ginger, etc. became an important part of the European cooking, and cotton cloth was very attractive. This eventually drew European traders to India. We will shortly read about how this changed the face of trading and towns. So you can see here there is a note on Kabul. With its rugged mountain landscape, Kabul in present-day Afghanistan became politically and commercially important from the 16th century onwards. Kabul and Kandahar were linked to the celebrated Silk Route. Beside the trading, horses were primarily carried on through these routes. In the 17th century, Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, a diamond merchant, estimated that the horse trade at Kabul amounted to rupees 30,000 annually, which was a huge sum on those days. Camel carried dried fruits, dates, carpets, silks, and even fresh fruits from Kabul to the subcontinents and elsewhere. Slaves were also brought from here for sale. Crafts in town, the craftsperson of Bidar were so famed for their inlay work in copper and silver that it came to be called Bidri. The Panchalas or Vishwakarma community, consisting of goldsmiths, bronzesmiths, blacksmiths, masons, and carpenters, were essential to the building of temples. So this Panchalas and Vishwakarmas were famous for building the temple. They also played an important role in construction of palaces, big buildings, tanks, reservoirs. Similarly, weavers such as the Saliyar or Kaikolars emerged as prosperous communities making donation to temples. Some aspect of clothes making like cotton, cleaning, spinning, and dyeing became specialist and independent craft. So you can see a 7th century candle stand, brass with black overlay. So you have seen with a black overlay. So you can see in this diagram, this is a shawl border. So you can see how beautiful it is. The changing fortunes of towns. Some towns like Ahmedabad, Gujarat went to become the major commercial city, but others like Tanjavur shrank in size and importance over the centuries. Murshidabad, West Bengal, on the bank of the Bhagirathi, which rose to prominence as center of silk and becoming the capital of Bengal in 1704, declined in the course of the century as the weavers faced competition from cheap mill-made cloth from England. So a closer look at Hampi, Muslipattnam, and Surat. So you can see a figure of a view from the watchtower through a broken wall of the enclosure of Hampi. So you can see a watchtower through the broken wall of Hampi. A closer look at Hampi and Muslipattnam and Surat. The architectural splendor of Hampi. Hampi is located in the Krishna Tungabhadra basin, which formed the nucleus of the Vijayanagara Empire. Founded in 1336, the magnificent ruins of Hampi reveal a well-fortified city. No mortar or cementing agent was used in the construction of this wall. So you can see here, no mortar and cementing agent was used in the construction of wall, and the technique followed was to wedge them together by interlocking. So by interlocking they were making the walls. A fortified city. This is how Portuguese traveler Domingos Peace described Hampi in the 16th century. At the entrance of the gate were those spas who come from Goa. The king has made within it a very strong city fortified with walls and towers. These walls were not like those of other cities, but are made of very strong masonry, such as would be found in the other parts, and inside very beautiful row buildings and made after their manner with flat roof. So you can see here, during the rule of the Vijayanagara, a ruler took keen interest in the building tanks and canals. The Anantara Sagar tank was built with a 1.37 kilometer long earthen dam across the Maldevi river. Krishnadeva Raya built a huge stone embankment between the two hills to create a massive lake near Vijayanagara, from which water was carried through aqueducts and channels to irrigate field and garden. So this was a very intelligent step by these kings to make use of water. The architecture of Hampi was distinctive. The buildings in the royal complex had splendid arches, domes, and pillared halls with niche for holding sculptures. They also had well-planned orchards and pleasure garden with sculptural motifs such as the lotus and corbels. It is a heyday in the 15th and 16th century. Hampi bustled with commercial and cultural activities. Muslim merchants, chettis, and agents of European traders such as the Portuguese thronged the market of Hampi. Temples were the hub of cultural activities, and Devdasis, temple dancers, performed before the deity. Royalty and masses in the many pillared halls in the Virupaksha, a form of Shiva temple. The Mahanavami festival, known today as Navratri in the south, was one of the most celebrated and important festival at Hampi. So you can see and diagram of stone chariot in Vithala temple, Hampi. So what a beautiful stone chariot it is. You can see that. Archaeologists have found the Mahanavami platform where the king received guests and accepted tribute from subordinate chiefs. From here, he also was dance and music performance as well as wrestling bouts. Hampi fell into ruins following the defeat of Vijayanagara in 1565 by the Deccani Sultan, the ruler of Golconda, Bijapur, Ahmednagar, Berar and Bidar. So emporium is a place where goods from diverse production centers are bought and sold. So a gateway to the west is Surat. Surat in Gujarat was the emporium of western trade during the Mughal period, along with Cambay, present day Khambat, and somewhat later Ahmedabad. Surat was the gateway to trade with West Asia via the Gulf of Ormuz. Surat has also been called the gate to Makkah because many pilgrim ships set sail from here. The city was cosmopolitan and people of all castes and creeds lived there. In the 17th century, the Portuguese, Dutch and English had their factories and warehouses at Surat. According to the English chronicler Ovington, who wrote an account of the port in 1689, on average 100 ships of different countries could be found anchored at the port at any given time. There were also several retail and wholesale shops selling cotton textiles. The textiles of Surat were famous for their gold lace borders, zari, and had a market in West Asia, Africa and Europe. The state built numerous rest houses to take care of the needs of people from all over the world who came to the city. There were magnificent buildings and innumerable pleasure parks. The Kathiawar Seth or Mahajans, money changers, had huge banking houses at Surat. It is noteworthy that the Surat's hundis. So what is hundi? Hundi is a note recording a deposit made by a person. The amount deposited can be claimed in another place by presenting the record of the deposit. So this was called hundi. So Surat hundi were honored in far-off markets of Cairo in Egypt, Basra in Iraq and Antwerp in Belgium. However, Surat began to decline towards the end of the 17th century. This was because of many factors, the loss of market and productivity because of the decline of the Mughal Empire, control of the sea route by the Portuguese and competition from the Bombay, present-day Mumbai, where the English East India Company shifted its headquarters in 1668. Today, Surat is bustling commercial center. Fishing is troubled waters. Musli-Patnam. So the town of Masulipatam or Machlipatam, literally a fishport town, lay on the delta of the Krishna River. In the 17th century, it was the center of intense activity. Both the Dutch and English East India companies attempted to control Masulipatam as it's become the most important part of the Andhra coast. The fort of Masulipatam was built by the Dutch. So what's a factor? Factor is an official in charge of trading activities of the European Trading Company. So a poor fisher town. This was the description of Masulipatam by William Methwold, a factor of the English East India Company in 1620. This is the chief port of Golconda, where the right worshipful East India Company have their agent. It is a small town but populous, unwalled, ill-built and was situated within all the springs are brackish. It was first a poor fisher town, afterwards the convenience of the road, a place where ship can anchor, made it a residence for merchants, and so continues since our and the Dutch nations frequented this coast. So the Qutb Shahi, ruler of Golconda, imposed royal monopolies on the sale of textiles, spices and other items to prevent the trade passing completely into the hands of the various East India companies. Fierce competition among various trading groups. The Golconda nobles, Persian merchants, Telugu Komati, Chettis and European traders made the city populous and prosperous. As the Mughals began to extend their power to Golconda, their representative, the governor Mir Jumla, who was also a merchant, began to play off the Dutch and the English against each other. In 1686 to 1687, Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb annexed Golconda. This caused the European companies to look for alternatives. It was a part of the new policy of the English East India Company that it was not enough in a port had connection with the production center of the hinterland. The new company trade centers, it was felt, should combine political, administrative and commercial rules. As the company traders moved the Bombay, Calcutta, present day Kolkata and Madras, present day Chennai, Masulipatam lost both its merchants and prosperity and declined in the course of the 18th century, being today nothing more than a dilapidated little town. New towns and traders. In the 16th century and 17th century, European countries were searching for spices and textile, which has become popular both in Europe and West Asia. The English, Dutch, and French formed the East India Company in order to expand their commercial activities in the East. Initially, great Indian traders like Mullah Abdul Ghaffur and Virji Bora, who owned a large number of ships, competed with them. However, the European companies used their naval power to gain control of the sea trade and forced Indian traders to work as their agents. Ultimately, the English emerged as the most successful commercial and political power in the subcontinent. The spurt in demand for goods like textiles led to the great expansion of the crafts of spinning, weaving, bleaching, dyeing, etc. With more and more people taking them up, Indian textile designs become increasingly refined. However, this period also saw the decline of the independence of craftspersons. They now began to work on a system of advances, which meant that they had to weave cloth which was already promised to European agents. Weavers no longer had the liberty of selling their own cloth or weaving their own patterns. They had to reproduce the designs supplied to them by the company agents. So they had no free will, they had to work for the company. The 18th century saw the rise of Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras, which are nodal cities today. Crafts and commerce underwent major changes, and merchants and artisans such as weavers were moved into the black towns established by the European companies within those new cities. The blacks, or the native traders and craftspersons, were confined here, while the white rulers occupied the superior residence of Fort St. George in Madras or Fort St. William in Calcutta. The story of crafts and commerce in the 18th century will be taken up next year. So you can see a Mumbai street early in 19th century. So this was the 19th century Mumbai street. You can see here Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. In the 15th century, European sailors undertook unprecedented exploration of sea routes. They were driven by the desire to find ways of reaching Indian subcontinent or obtaining spices. Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese sailor, sailed down to African coast, went around the Cape of Good Hope, and crossed over the Indian Ocean. His first journey took more than a year. He reached Calicut in 1498 and returned to Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. The following year, he lost 2 of his 4 ships, and of the 170 men at the start of the journey only 54 survived. In spite of the obvious hazards, the routes that were opened up proved to be extremely profitable, and he was followed by English, Dutch, and French sailors. The search for sea routes to India had another unexpected fall down. On the assumption that the earth was round, Christopher Columbus, an Italian, decided to sail westward across the Atlantic Ocean to find a route to India. He landed in the West Indies, which got their name because of the confusion. In 1492, he was followed by sailors and conquerors from Spain and Portugal, who occupied large part of Central and South America, often destroying earlier settlement in the area. So you can see in the figure 9, Vasco da Gama, he was a sailor. So here the chapter is finished, and we will start the next chapter in the next class. Thank you.